There's a certain kind of exhaustion that doesn't always look like exhaustion. It's quiet, invisible. It hides behind a smile, behind helpfulness, behind the phrase, "No, it's fine. I don't mind." But deep down, there's an ache that never quite goes away. It's not the exhaustion of working too hard. It's the exhaustion of never being able to say no, of feeling responsible for everyone's comfort except your own, of lying in bed at night replaying moments when you should have set a boundary but didn't. You tell yourself you're just being nice, that it's who you are, that people need you. But somewhere along the way, kindness stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like a trap you can't escape. People often assume that those who can't say no are simply too agreeable, too soft, too eager to please. But that's rarely the full truth. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes they're the most perceptive people in the room. They notice every micro shift in tone, every subtle change in energy, every flicker of disappointment crossing someone's face. They can feel when someone is upset before a word is spoken. They sense tension in a room like others sense temperature. Psychologically, this is what researchers call hypervigilance to social cues. Dr. Elaine Aron at Stony Brook University found that highly sensitive people process emotional information more deeply than others. Their brains show greater activation in areas related to empathy and awareness. They're not weak, they're wired differently. What if the inability to say no isn't a character flaw? What if it's a nervous system that learned too well how to read the room? What if it's intelligence, not weakness? When you can't say no, something happens in your body before your mind even catches up. Someone asks for help. Your chest tightens. Your breath catches slightly. Your stomach drops. You feel the weight of their expectation pressing against you like a physical force. And in that moment, two voices compete inside your head. One says, "I don't want to do this. I'm already tired. I already have too much on my plate." The other says, "But I should. They need me. What kind of person would I be if I refused?" The second voice always wins. Not because you're generous, not because you're kind, because saying yes feels safer than dealing with what might happen if you say no. The disappointment in their voice, the guilt that would follow you for days, the fear that they'll think you're selfish, that they'll see you differently, that they'll stop needing you. And if they stop needing you, what then? So you say yes, again, and again, and again. You smile, you nod, you say, "Of course, no problem." And inside, something small and quiet begins to break. Your body keeps score even when your mind pretends everything is fine. This doesn't happen overnight. Usually it starts in childhood with small lessons about what keeps you safe. A parent who only praised you when you were helpful, when you cleaned without being asked, when you didn't complain, when you made their life easier. Or maybe a sibling who got attention by being difficult, by throwing tantrums, by demanding. So you learned to be the opposite, to be easy, to be the child who never caused problems, or a teacher who rewarded compliance and punished any form of resistance, who taught you that good children help, bad children refuse. You learned early that being agreeable was the way to avoid conflict, the way to avoid disappointment, the way to avoid being seen as difficult or selfish or too much. Over time, this buries itself deep inside your nervous system. It's no longer a conscious choice. It's automatic. You didn't just learn to say yes. You learned that your value comes from being useful, from being accommodating, from being low maintenance, from never making anyone uncomfortable. You learned that love is conditional, that it must be earned through service. And even now in adulthood, that wiring remains. When someone asks something of you, your brain doesn't ask, "Do I want this?" It doesn't ask, "Do I have capacity for this?" It asks, "Will they be upset if I refuse? Will they think less of me? Will I lose their approval?" The decision isn't about you. It's about managing their emotions, their perception, their needs. You became so good at reading other people that you forgot how to read yourself. Dr. Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA found that the brain processes social rejection in the same regions that process physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex lights up identically whether you're experiencing a broken bone or social exclusion. When you imagine disappointing someone, when you picture their face falling or their tone shifting cold, your brain registers it as a threat, not metaphorically. Actually, your nervous system responds as if you're in danger. This isn't weakness, this is evolutionary wiring, because the human brain evolved in small tribes of around 150 people. And to be rejected, to be seen as unhelpful or uncooperative or selfish, was once a genuine survival risk. Your ancestors who maintained group harmony, who said yes, who helped even when tired, they survived. They stayed in the tribe. They had protection, resources, belonging. The ones who didn't, who prioritized their own needs over the group's, often faced exile. And exile meant death. Your inability to say no isn't a personality flaw. It's an ancient adaptation trying to keep you safe in a world that no longer works the same way. Your brain is running software designed for survival in a context that no longer exists. We live in a world that celebrates kindness but rarely questions its cost. Your ancestors had maybe 150 people in their entire world. You have thousands. Every text message, every email, every request from a co-worker, a friend, a family member, an acquaintance you barely know. Each one could signal danger to your nervous system. Modern culture tells us that kindness is always good, that generosity is always noble, that saying yes makes you a better person, that boundaries are selfish. We worship self-sacrifice. We celebrate the people who give endlessly, the martyrs, the helpers, the ones who never complain. But no one talks about what happens when kindness becomes compulsive. When generosity stops being a gift and starts being an obligation you can't refuse. When you've said yes so many times that you've forgotten what your own preferences even sound like. When the thought of disappointing someone feels more terrifying than betraying yourself. There's a particular kind of loneliness in being the person everyone depends on. People admire you for being reliable, for being helpful, for always showing up when they need something. They call you dependable, generous, a good friend. But they rarely ask how you're doing. They rarely consider what it costs you to always be available. They rarely notice when you're struggling because you've trained them not to look. Behind every yes is quiet resentment, not anger toward the people asking, frustration with yourself for not being able to choose differently, for once again abandoning your own needs, for once again putting yourself last. You start noticing the pattern. How you cancel plans with yourself but never with others. How you'll skip meals to help someone move. How you'll stay up late finishing someone else's project while your own work waits. While your own dreams collect dust. How you give everyone your best energy and save your exhaustion for yourself. How you're kind to everyone except the person staring back at you in the mirror. And beneath it all, a question you're afraid to answer. What if they only want me because I'm useful? What if the moment I stop giving, they disappear? What if my value is conditional? What if I'm only loved when I'm helpful? Not selfishness, self-preservation, not cruelty, clarity, not rejection, honesty, not coldness, protection. Here's what happens when you start to see the pattern clearly. There's something that shifts when you stop saying, "I'm just being kind." When you start asking, what am I protecting myself from? The first makes you noble. The second makes you human. You're not kind because you're good. You're kind because you're afraid. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of disappointing people. Afraid of being seen as selfish. Afraid of what happens when you stop performing. Maybe kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. Maybe it's a strategy, a performance, a way to earn love you're afraid you don't deserve without effort. Maybe it's a way to control how people see you, to manage their perception. to ensure they never see the parts of you that feel needy or difficult or human. Maybe it's easier to be needed than to need, safer to give than to ask, less vulnerable to help than to admit you're the one who's struggling. Because if you're always the helper, you never have to risk being the one who gets rejected. If you're always strong, you never have to find out if anyone would catch you if you fell. If you're always giving, you never have to face the possibility that no one would give back. What if you spoke to yourself the way a kind friend would? Not, "You're fine, stop complaining, other people have it worse." But, "You're tired, that's real, that matters. Your needs are just as valid as everyone else's." What if protecting your energy isn't selfish? What if it's the only way to have energy worth giving? Because kindness that empties you isn't sustainable. And relationships built on your depletion aren't real relationships. They're transactions. You give, they take. And everyone pretends that's love. Saying no isn't rejection. It's information. It's letting people know where you actually are instead of where you think they need you to be. It's honesty instead of performance. And the people who can't handle your no were never looking for connection. They were looking for convenience. The people who truly care about you don't need you to say yes every time. They need you to be honest. They need to know the real you, not the version that's always available, always helpful, always fine. Real connection isn't built on accommodation. It's built on truth. Maybe the first step isn't learning to say no. Maybe it's grieving the belief that your worth is conditional, that you must earn love through service, that rest is something you have to deserve. Maybe it's understanding that you're not responsible for managing everyone's emotions, that their disappointment isn't your emergency, that their comfort isn't more important than your well-being. Maybe it's realizing that the people who love you want you whole, not depleted. They want your presence, not your performance. There will come a time when someone asks you for something and you feel that familiar tightness in your chest. That old voice will whisper, "Just say yes, it's easier, you can handle it, don't be selfish." But another voice, quieter at first, will say, "You don't owe them your exhaustion." And in that moment, you'll have a choice. Not because you've fixed yourself, not because you've become selfish or cold or hard, but because you finally understand that your worth isn't measured by how much you give away, that you can be kind and have boundaries, that you can be generous and protect your peace, that saying no to them is sometimes saying yes to yourself. And that's not cruelty, that's balance. So if you're someone who can't say no, please understand this. You're not weak, you're not broken, you're not doing it wrong. You're just carrying an old lesson that no longer serves you. A lesson that kept you safe once, but now keeps you small. There will still be moments when saying no feels impossible, when the guilt rises up and makes you question everything, when you wonder if you're being selfish, if you're overreacting, if you should just push through. That's okay. That's not failure. That's being human. That's the old wiring trying to protect you the only way it knows how. But there will also come a day when you say no and the world doesn't end. When you protect your time and the people who matter understand. When you realize that the ones who stay aren't the ones you please the most. They're the ones who saw you clearly, boundaries and all, and chose you anyway. Not for what you could do for them, but for who you are. You'll realize that kindness was never the problem. It was kindness without choice, generosity without consent, giving without receiving. And that's not love. That's depletion wearing love's mask. You'll realize that you spent years trying to be easy, trying to be low maintenance, trying to need nothing. And all it did was teach people that you didn't need care, that you were fine, that they could lean without ever holding you up. But you weren't fine. You were just too afraid to be anything else. Maybe that's the truest kind of kindness there is. Not endless giving, but honest boundaries. Not self-sacrifice, but self-respect. Not accommodation at all costs, but authenticity even when it's uncomfortable. Because kindness that includes you is sustainable. Kindness that excludes you eventually runs dry. Not weakness, depth, not selfishness. Survival, not cruelty. Courage, not rejection. Clarity. Until then, walk gently with yourself. You're not broken. You're human, and that's enough.